Senator Hawley, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Hey, thank you.
I want to talk to you about this book. It's interesting. It does not seem to me like the kind of book a typical politician in your status or your stature or your point in your career would write. It's surprising in a lot of ways in terms of the content that's within it. What was it that spurred you to feel like you needed to address this crisis in the United States?
Really, my boys. I mean, that's where it started. I've got two little boys, 10, and I say little, I mean, they're 10 and 8 now. And then I've got a little girl at home who's 2. But it was really being a father. I mean, you know what this is like, Ben. Becoming a father changes your perspective on a lot of things. But then as my boys are starting to get older, they're school age, of course. I mean, they're heading into, my older boys is knocking on the door of his middle school years here in a few years. And just seeing their world that they're living in, the influences, hear all of this talk about, now there's no such thing as gender, there's no such thing as manhood or womanhood, and then the constant barrage of messaging from our culture that, if you're a boy, if you're a man, that there's something that's wrong with that. And I just, that's what got me thinking about this. And then seeing it, of course, from a public policy perspective, I mean, you can see the numbers, the suicides among men, the drug abuse among men, the depression levels among men. It's off the chart. I mean, it's just undeniable that we have some kind of a crisis going on among men in this country. And so those things came together, and I thought, well, maybe this is something I should dig into.
You talk about the crisis when it comes to suicide in a personal way, how it's affected you and affected those close to you. Talk to me a little bit about the decision that you made to address that, because it seems to me that that's a very hard thing to talk about, and I say that as someone who also, I've lost basically my 3 closest friends to war, a tragic car accident, and suicide over the course of my life. Was it difficult for you to grapple with that and sharing that on the page?
Yeah. In fact, I didn't set out to write it that way. I was trying to think about how can I share something that connects? And part of this, Ben, is, I mean, as a writer, when you start writing, it doesn't always end up how you first intended to go. But with this, I tell the story about my best friend who I lost to suicide when I was 23. He was just shy of his 23rd birthday. He was 22. And, I found myself writing about it. To be honest, I haven't talked about it much in 20 years. I mean, I'm 43 now. So that was 20 years ago this April, as a matter of fact. And I really haven't said much about it. And for me, it was trying to think about what are men struggling with, and what does it look like, this struggle with a loss of sense of purpose and meaning. And so I ended up writing about that, and it was a journey for sure. But I wanted to be it's something that has been a significant moment in my life, and I wanted to share it. I mean, it's just something authentic that I came to me as I was writing. So
the book is shot through, obviously, with your perspective on Christian faith.
yeah.
It seems to me, though, that there is this underlying element of your indictment of the approach of American culture to masculinity that essentially demands a return to faith that cannot be achieved through politics or through any kind of government schedule. The typical political book is a politician both telling their life story and then saying, this is the bullet points of things I believe and why I believe them, and here's the agenda that I'm offering the country.
Yeah.
Your book does not come off like that. Instead, it's much more, I think, personal. What do you think, though, is the things that we can do on the margins to urge the kind of responsibility, the kind of manhood that you suggest is so essential to the American project?
I think the key thing that we've got to start with is we've got to send a message to every man in America, and especially young men, that their life matters and that we need them to step up. We need them to be responsible, and that their life, if they will choose right where they are, if they will choose to take responsibility, to provide for the people they love, to shoulder their potential, they can change the trajectory. They can change the destiny of their family, their neighborhood, and this country. I mean, I just distill it down to that. And as I talk with young men around the country. I used to teach them, and that comes through in the book. I talk about some of my conversations with students over the years. And as I get to talk to them now across my state and around the country, this is my message to them, is that you are vitally needed. And hey, America needs stronger men. We need men who are going to be responsible. We need men who are going to be providers, be protectors, be builders, as I talk about in one of the chapters. So I think that sending that message is absolutely clear. And then, if you want to talk about some of the policy implications of this, there are those. And I talk about, for instance, the loss of blue-collar work, blue-collar jobs in this country. I think that's a big deal. I mean, when you've got 70% of men in this country, I believe the statistic is, who do not have a 4-year college degree, we need to quit telling those men there's something wrong with them. That, oh, you got to go to college to get any respect in this country. I think that's totally, completely wrong. And as a policymaker, I think we need to be focused on getting good paying blue collar jobs back in this country and urging the men who want to do those, which is a lot of men, to say, hey, that's great. We need you to do that. That's honorable work. That's awesome. You should be applauded. You should be honored. And you should be saluted for wanting to be a provider for your family. So I think there are significant policy cash outs here. But I agree with your setup, which is that what fundamentally what ails America in terms of what we see with men can't be fixed by passing some bill. It's got to be fixed by the men themselves turning back and saying, wait a minute, there is purpose for my life. My life can make a difference. I do have a destiny and a future. And I turn to the Bible to try to say what I think that is and where hope lies.
There's this viral statistic that's out there, but it's one that does have merit, which is essentially pointing to one of the worst performing British areas and saying that that's the median American lifespan. This increase of death in America and death rates in America that comes earlier and earlier. And most of that, when you look at it, is driven not by, as much as the Europeans would like it to be driven by, the presence of guns or the fact that we drive a lot of cars, but it seems to be mostly driven by deaths of despair, as they call them, either the overdoses that we've seen within our communities, fentanyl on the one hand, opioids as well, that have driven up and become, the most prevalent form of death that we see for Americans who are of an age that they ought to be able to live for decades and decades more. To me, a big part of that is the type of frame that you put in your book, one of just complete atomization, of assumption that leisure is something spent alone. That seems to me the complete opposite of leisure historically. But it's one of these things where I feel like there is a need for a policy answer on that front. Something has to be able to be done that prevents these kinds of deaths of despair, or at least, prevents the availability, the ready availability of the resources used to essentially wreck your life. I listened to a podcast by comedian Shane Gillis, who has always said sort of, why do you commit suicide? Just, move to the middle of nowhere and start doing meth. And that seems to me to be both a joke, but also something that far too many people are actually living out today. Yeah. How do we prevent that?
Well, and you're talking to a guy who represents a state that's been hard hit by first meth. You mentioned that used to be the number one killer of young men in Missouri. It's not anymore. Now it's fentanyl. And we went through the opioid crisis. And I would say a couple things. I mean, the first is those deaths of despair are often fueled. Some of them are suicides by, shall we say, more traditional means. But you look at the numbers of the addiction, deaths of despair, a lot of them fueled in the last 20 years, 25 years by the opioid epidemic. And, there's accountability to be had there by the people who helped fuel that epidemic by telling Americans that those drugs are 100% safe, you can take them in mass quantities, it's okay, basically big pharma. So I don't mince any words in terms of, in my policy stances, what I think about big pharma and what the bill of goods they've sold to Americans. So I think if you want to talk about policy implications here, one of them is that big pharma needs to be on the hook. I happen to have sued the big pharma companies as Attorney General of Missouri for this reason. They need to be on the hook for what they have done. The flip side of that, though, has been, why is there this despair to begin with? Mm-hmm. And, the book is in some ways an attempt to answer that question by turning to what's our purpose in life, what's our purpose as men. From a policy perspective, I would just say that I don't think it's any accident that a lot of this despair and a lot of these deaths are occurring in communities that are post-industrial communities where good-paying blue-collar jobs used to be available and now are not. Where you had factory towns, you had manufacturing towns, you had areas where there was industry, you could get a good job, you could support your family on that job. Now they're gone. In the last 30 years, it has been the decimation of industry in this country, especially blue-collar industry. Policymakers have got to make it a top priority. Conservatives, I just say to my fellow conservatives, if you really care about the culture, conservatives talk all the time about the culture, great. If you care about the culture, do something about the fabric of our culture, which is good paying jobs for blue collar workers. If we don't do that, all the talk about the culture is not going to amount to anything, in my view.
Well, one of the things that sticks out to me, though, about that is that, it is easier to do the kind of jobs and the kind of things that people have that atomize themselves. They work from home. They don't have to come home feeling sore after a job. There's the Charles Murray bubble test, obviously, of, if you ever been on a factory floor, have you ever come home, with your back hurting from the work that you did? That's a very different experience of life than what is currently being offered. Bernie Sanders, for instance, is calling for, eliminating a 40-hour work week on behalf of, Americans that he thinks, would benefit from that and would have more freedom. But at the same time, what do you end up with? What does that look like? It's not the same as, it's going to be something that goes toward keyboard warriors and the like. It's something that benefits someone like me. It doesn't benefit people who actually have to work a job where they have to be there, physically. And, I just have to think, back to, the idea that is established in, I don't know if you're even familiar with it, but he's a folk rock guy, Father John Misty, who has this song "Total Entertainment Forever," where he talks about a reality where you're able to bed Taylor Swift every night in the Oculus Rift, and then ultimately you'll find at the end of the day that this is a society, a system where you accomplish nothing in your life other than being kind of stuck in a pod, replaying things over and over again. It sounds like a technological nightmare on the broad scale when you step back and look at it. But when it comes to kind of the appeal that can be offered to people who are currently existing in manual labor jobs where they have to show up on time and do all these other things and juggle their life with it, there's a certain appeal to it. How can we combat that?
Well, I might dispute your premise. I mean, I
Okay.
don't know that there is, in sense of the appeal. I don't know how much appeal there really is. I mean, I'm just thinking of. So I come from a family of farmers. My mother's whole side of the family are farmers. I write about this in my book because my grandpa was a huge influence on my life. And these are guys who work with their hands, right, every day. They love that work. Love it, love it, love it. And I think this total entertainment forever, great phrase, that really does describe modern liberalism. I mean, that's what I think they offer the country.
Yeah.
Hey, total entertainment forever. And there's a trade-off, though. It's total entertainment for you. Government will provide that in some form.
Yes.
And meanwhile, but we'll run the country. So
Yes.
let the experts,
And the world will decay around you, and
And the world
nothing
will
new
decay
and
around it,
good
yeah.
and
So-
beautiful will be created.
Exactly. So let the experts do it. You just shut
Yeah.
up and go entertain yourself here. Have some money too. You want us to write you a check? Yeah. Oh, we can't get you a job. We gave those to China. And no, there's nothing for you to make. but
And they're
hey,
building
it's
the
okay.
pods that you live in now where you can have total entertainment forever.
Yeah, sit over here. We'll write you a check. But you shut up. Remain pliable. Shut up. Do this. Look at something on the internet. Entertain yourself, and let us run your life for you. And I think as conservatives, part of what we have to say is that's not liberty. Not in our tradition. Our tradition is no. The people, strong, independent men and women, manage their own lives. That means they got to have independence economically, good paying jobs. That means they got to have independence culturally, where the government isn't able to tell them what to do in every aspect of their lives. So I think getting back to that tradition is absolutely critical. And I think that creating good blue collar jobs where people can support a family on a good wage ought to be a top conservative priority. And combating the liberal alternative then to this is basically what, as near as I can tell, the liberal program is total globalism, where we lose 3+ million manufacturing jobs to China, What are they going to do about that? Just write people checks. They just say, well, universal basic income. You don't need to work. Here, we'll just give you a check. I don't think that's really what most people want, what most men want. They want to have a job. They want to have an independence, a sense of independence. They want to be able to say they provide, because there's a self-respect and dignity that comes from saying, no, hold on. I work for a living. I earn the paycheck. I provide for the people I love. They want to have that. One of the many problems with modern liberalism is it wants to take all that away. It doesn't understand any of that. It just wants to write people checks and then say, let the experts run stuff. And I think that's a huge problem.
In about a third of the way through your book, you have a passage that I think is very important about, you write throughout the book, obviously, about this Epicurean myth of what manhood looks like. And you hold up the example of one person in particular, Andrew Tate, who you describe as a social media provocateur, self-styled success coach for men. Tate's idea of success apparently involves sleeping with as many women as possible, berating them, abusing them, celebrating it all as manly as freedom. As reported by the New York Post, Tate advised his followers to slap, grab, choke women in the bedroom. There's all sorts of other terrible comments that he made. I want to put forward an alternate view of Andrew Tate, espoused by someone who I also know. He said, I will say it, if I'm just being honest, there's something I miss and love about Andrew Tate. Spirit that animates Andrew Tate is very clear. It's very obvious. It's not a malicious spirit at all. Andrew Tate's core message is to respect yourself and act like you're worth something, achieving something, doing something, get the F up off the couch, like go do something with your life. And I feel like that's the greatest message that anyone could give. Now, that was my former colleague, Tucker Carlson, someone who is aligned with you frequently in media politically. I think Tucker is absolutely wrong about Andrew Tate, and I think you're absolutely right. Why is he making the mistake, as so many other conservatives that I know, of viewing Andrew Tate as being a positive voice of masculinity versus a negative? Because I have heard that from so many people who are in this space, who are conservative, and who tend to speak about the need for a return to positive manhood. I think of it as adjacent to the BAP, the Bronze Age pervert. You may have heard of him, but he's someone who's written for a lot of places. I think of it, though, as the antithesis of manhood, the antithesis of responsible fatherhood and the treatment of others. Adjudicate this for me. Answer this question.
Yeah, I think what you have is decades now of the modern liberal attack on the very idea of masculinity. I mean, really, it's on gender, right? It's manhood and womanhood, as we're seeing now play out with girls' sports, with the idea of femininity. That's a different subject. But when it comes to manhood, you've got the liberal line, which is men are inherently toxic. To be a man is to be inherently destructive. That nothing you can do as a man that is in any way masculine in any traditional sense is good. In fact, it is inherently evil, right? That's the constant barrage that the left and increasingly the media and our educational establishment pushes on boys and men. So then over and against that, you have what appears to be a reaction from sort of the Andrew Tate-like folks. My problem with them, though, is that they appear to embrace what I think is the fundamental falsehood of the leftist narrative. You got people like Andrew Tate said, yeah, to be a man is to be an aggressor, an abuser. It is to be toxic, and that's good. It's good to be toxic. My message is it's fundamentally wrong. Both parties have got it wrong. They bought into the Andrew Tate-like camp has bought into the leftist lie. To be a man is not inherently toxic. It is not inherently destructive. That's just not true. Mm-hmm. Are men on balance more aggressive? Yes. Do they love strength? Yes. Is that good? Yes, absolutely. But that is meant.
Are your boys more destructive than your girl? I mean, she's only 2, but still.
Totally. No question. My wife and I laugh all the time. Our boys, we couldn't allow them to be alone. They would throw themselves down the stairs. My little girl, she's civilized, right? She gets it. It's like, I'd like to live my life. I don't want to be dead. The boys, civilization would not exist, had it not been for mothers and women, in our infancy protecting us. There's something to that. But then the boy grows up, right? And he learns to channel, rather, that aggression, that strength, that adventure, sense of adventure, he channels that towards providing, towards protecting, towards pioneering, towards breaking a path. And this is why in the book I talk about the different virtues of a father, a husband, a warrior, a builder. We need that masculine strength. We need men to be stronger. So I think the answer is, it's just not true that manhood is inherently toxic, and we shouldn't turn around and defend it and say, yeah, manhood is toxic and that's good. No, that's wrong. To be a man is to have a sense of purpose, is to be called toward a certain sense of a certain set of duties, to be a husband, to be a father, to be a builder, to be a warrior, and that's what the book is about.
I think that one of the things that is so important that you can take away from this book is the restoration of faith. And yet I do not see, for the most part, in our current culture, the indications that restoration is happening. Obviously, that restoration has to come from something other than government. Policy can work on the sidelines to, change the way that we treat welfare, or the way that we, potentially, reward activity that results in more fatherlessness. But there does not seem a strong element of revival, except for this. There are signs, as you may have seen in the most recent poll data collected by a number of different sources, but this includes, Pew Research, which is, a gold standard type of operation, that the youngest generation of Americans is actually far more interested in church going and does attend church more than those in the middle set. You can ascribe various reasons to this. A lot of people have said it's something that comes out of the pandemic or out of the experiences of their own childhood. Do you see green shoots when it comes to any kind of religious restoration in America?
Yeah, I do. And I think at the core of that then is a longing for purpose. And I think you can't talk to a young man in America and not just feel the longing for that. People, the liberal line is, for a couple centuries now, this is the Epicurean liberalism I talk about in the book, but we see it in our popular culture all the time. The liberal line is, listen, the universe is basically meaningless, right? There's not, it doesn't mean anything. You got to bring the meaning, right? And how do you bring the meaning? Indulge yourself, pleasure, go make yourself happy, go do whatever it takes to make yourself happy. That is a gospel that has been preached for 50 some years at a very loud volume in this country, and you see the results of it all around you, and you see young people, I think, saying, there's got to be more to life than this. And I think that is a hopeful response. They're looking around, and this is one of the reasons I tell so many stories in the book, and that I look overall at the story of the Bible. I mean, I look at the overarching story of the Bible, and what do men in the Bible do? Because I think we need the story. We need to see, hold on, what does it actually look like? What's the model here? What is an alternate view of reality, which is what you're getting at? I mean, the Bible presents an alternate view of reality. It says, actually, no, there is a purpose for your life, and that you as a man have a purpose, and that your life is going to have influence, for good or for ill. You decide, right? I mean, it's up to you to decide. It can have tremendous influence for good. And, you can be the one who changes the destiny of your family. You can be the one who breaks cycles that, have come down in your family. You can change that. You can do it. And I think that kind of message, people are hungry for that. Young men are hungry for that. And to me, that's extremely hopeful. Then it's a big reason I wrote the book. It's a big reason I talk so much about the Bible. I tell so many stories about men who've been influential in my life, is I think those stories, that model, that sense of hope and purpose is really what men, especially young men, are longing for.
You write, obviously, about your own challenges in terms of your wife's experience with miscarriage.
Yeah.
That's something that I think is difficult for people to write about, but it's certainly difficult for men to write about. How can we change the understanding of miscarriage in American society? I saw a friend just this past week, bemoaning this fact, including, sort of the treatment of her own miscarriage. It's very sad to me that people are not more open about that experience and what it entails. Is that something where we can achieve some kind of change, and what does it require?
Yeah, I do tell that story. It was a hard story to tell. This is our first our first baby, my wife's first pregnancy, we lost the baby to miscarriage. And I tell it partly because to me, it brought home to me the significance of fatherhood and what a gift it is. It really changed as a man. I'm not carrying the baby, obviously, and no, men can't get pregnant, just for those who are still in any doubt. So it changed, though, for me, the significance of fatherhood, because I began to see what fatherhood is an incredible gift. It's not just a biological fact. It's not something you can count on. And the millions of couples who want to have kids and can't can attest to that, right? I mean, there can be a lot of pain involved. But it is an incredible gift. It is an incredible responsibility. And losing our first baby really brought that home to me, which is why I tell the story. We did find in our experience that almost nobody talks about miscarriage. It's funny, after my wife miscarried and we shared that with just a few people, it was amazing how many people in our family, older adults in our family, said, oh yeah, we also had a miscarriage. But we'd never heard that before. Nobody ever talks about it. So I think it partly speaks to the need for folks, number one, for men buying into being husbands and fathers, but then also I think for living our lives in communities where we really see and know each other. I think part of it gets back to the atomization you referenced earlier, Ben. I think one of the reasons that we don't talk about this much is that more and more we live lives where we're not really that deeply connected with other people. Yeah, you may see the same person at work and be friendly with them, and maybe you see the same set of people, the grocery store or wherever else you may go, but we have more and more in our modern culture, we live hermetically sealed lives where we're not deeply enmeshed with other people, where we're really doing life together. And I think one of the things that came out of that for me, besides the deep significance of fatherhood, the gift that it is also that, it's a privilege to have people in your life where they know when things like this happen, you can walk through it together, and you live in a community where it's like, I'm actually going to see this person face to face. It's a real community where we care about each other. And I think rebuilding those communities at small scale in our churches, in our neighborhoods, that is a deeply conservative project, and it's one that's well worth undertaking.
Last question for
Yeah.
you. There's a perspective on American political leadership as well in this. It underlies a lot of what you're writing about here in the book, in the sense that we have a political leadership now, a class that has largely never worked with their hands, has not served in the military, has not had to rebuild a car or a house, has not had to learn the lesson that you can be good without being perfect. That kind of tragic lesson that Victor Davis Hanson writes about existence, something that was untrue of a lot of America's presidents and America's political leadership historically. Is there a way to restore that to a government environment that seems to be much more about the test of whether you're going to be a pundit with a flag pin, or someone who doesn't have to go through the expectations of prior generations when it comes to learning the lessons that come from that kind of hardworking, rough-handed, sore experience that informed so many of our great Americans, going back to Teddy Roosevelt, who you obviously wrote about, but also others as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that a lot of the current crisis of American politics, if I can put it that way, can be explained by the fact that our elites, our elected officials, policymakers, and elites are increasingly totally disconnected from the way of life that most Americans live, from the kind of work that they do, from the kind of neighborhoods they live in, from the churches that they go to. So there's this yawning chasm that continues to get wider and wider and wider. And that, of course, is deeply, deeply unhealthy for a democracy. What's the answer to that? I mean, I would say it's for the folks who are the self-appointed experts and say that they're the ones who govern the country. It's to actually go back and listen to the people who elected you, and go back and live the life that they live. I mean, I just think there's no substitute for actually living out the life of the people who you say you're there to represent. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. And then we need more folks who are in everyday walks of life and say, man, I would never think about running for office. Well, we probably need you to. I mean, you're a farmer, you're a mechanic, you're an electrician, whatever. Boy, we need to hear your voice. But I think our our elites have forgotten who they represent. I mean, that's what I would just say. I think they've forgotten who they represent. I can just tell you, I've been in Washington 4 years, not very long. Sometimes seems like a lifetime. And I tell you who's very well represented. The views of Wall Street are very well represented. The views of the C-suite, very well represented. Right? The views of people with money are very well represented. The views of your average blue-collar worker, no. No. The views of your average electrician, plumber, farmer, no. And that, I think, has got to change. And I think that the people who are currently in power have got to remember who it is who sent them there and why they're there. I'll just leave you with this. One of my cousins, who I was just hanging out with the other day, he's an electrician. It's one of the reasons that is top of mind for me, and I'm really proud of him. He just got his certificate, and he's doing great. He's quite a bit younger than I am. He's one of my younger cousins. But he said something interesting to me when I got elected to the Senate. I get elected, and he says to me, he said, shortly before I went to go take my oath and all that stuff, and his comment to me was, he said, Josh, don't forget the people who got you where you are and who you're supposed to represent. And I just thought, that was simple, straightforward advice, but it was really profound advice. And I think that it is not very many folks are living by that right now.
Senator Hawley, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you.